When we first saw the Portal, we weren't really sure what to make of it. I mean, a VR handheld hybrid sounds a little bit weird, but after being able to play with it for a few days, I think it's pretty clear what this is. Now, the big question is, does it do enough to help us stand out against some pretty heavy competition? Let's find out. As usual, let's start by taking a look at the price and the specs. So we have 3 different models to pick from, starting at $369, going all the way up to $549. Now the biggest difference between all 3 of them is going to be the screen. The lower end models have an LCD screen, while the higher end model has a QLED screen. Other than that, all 3 are going to have 8 GB of RAM, and you have 2 different options for storage, 128 and 256 GB. For the OS, we have Android 10. Our CPU is a Qualcomm XR2, which is essentially an overclocked 865, which means you're going to get very good performance. Our GPU is a Qualcomm Adreno 650, and like I said earlier, we have 8 GB of RAM, our storage 128 to 56. Our screen is going to be a 5.5-inch 144Hz 4K LCD or QLED display, which just sounds crazy on a handheld. It also supports Wi-Fi 6 and 5G connectivity. We have Bluetooth 5.0, a 4000 mAh battery that's going to give you about 3 to 6 hours depending on what power profile you're using, video over USB-C, and it also has active cooling. So just going off the specs, we can already tell this is going to be one of the most powerful handhelds available that's not an x86. But let's see if we can get a little bit of a better idea of what this chip can do. So like I was saying earlier, the Snapdragon XR2 is a variant of the Snapdragon 865 that was made specifically for AR and VR headsets. The biggest difference is that it has an overclocked GPU. So if we take a look at the 865 stock GPU, it's clocked in at 250 MHz as a base with a 587 boost. If we look at the XR2's GPU, we have a 587 base with a 905 boost. So that's going to translate to much better performance in both native gaming and in emulation versus what you would find in the 865, which on its own is a very capable chip for both of these things. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the actual device. Okay, so let's take a look at the hardware that we're working with, and first we're going to take a look at the whole unit and then look at the controllers individually. So on the bottom we have our USB Type-C slot and our 2 bottom facing speakers. On the top we have our mini HDMI out, and we also have a little tray for our SIM card and our SD card. Power button is going to be right behind that, and if we take a look at the back, we have 1 big exhaust fan and 1 pretty good size intake fan, which is going to help our active cooling. We also have 5 cameras in the back and 1 in the front for a total of 6, and unfortunately we don't have a dedicated volume button or a headphone jack, but that's not a huge deal because we can control volume from software and it's pretty easy to do. Not having a headphone jack is unfortunate, but it's not something a pair of Bluetooth headphones can't fix. Now taking a look at the controllers, we can see that these are held on here by magnets, and these are some pretty strong magnets, so my whole time playing with them I wasn't really worried about them coming off. You have to pull it at an angle for that to happen, so it's pretty sturdy. Now taking a look at the controller itself, we have some extra buttons up here that unfortunately in Android don't really have a function, but do function if you go into VR mode, which unfortunately I don't have access to right now, so I've pretty much just been using them as my hotkeys and emulators. The sticks are basically just switch sticks, and I understand not everybody's a fan of them, but I think we're all pretty much used to them at this point. Now the D-pad, or lack thereof, is 4 individual buttons that, while they feel good, they have very short travel and a good click to them, not too loud but definitely tactile. It's just not ideal. It's exactly what Nintendo did with the Joy-Con, and I was never a fan of that. I understand the use for them if you're going individually, but I don't know how many of us are really going to take advantage of this, so I feel like it was a wasted opportunity to not go with the D-pad instead of these individual buttons. But yeah, this is basically just a smaller Joy-Con. Moving on from there, we do have 3 more buttons here. One is going to be our back button, our home button, and then we have a hamburger menu button that doesn't really do anything in Android, but it does help with reconnecting. L1 has a soft click. And underneath that, we have our analog triggers. Now, these have what I consider to be a good amount of travel, but it also has a good amount of resistance, so mileage will vary on whether you like these or not. There's also a click at the very end, so pretty much you're going to get full depression, and then if you pull a little bit more, you're going to get an extra press, much like you would with like an original GameCube controller. And it's a pretty satisfying press. I know in the past I've said I don't like clicky controllers, but this one has the right type of click, not that hard like mouse click. So it gets a pass. On the other side, we basically have the same thing, and we have an L and R over here on the inside, which this is again if you wanted to use these as individual controllers, but they're hard to use, and I really don't know how many people are going to take advantage of this. I feel like this is a feature that not many people wanted in this handheld. In theory, it sounds pretty cool, just like the Switch. Take it off, give it to somebody, and you can set that in software for 2-player mode, but we'll cover that in a little bit. Let's keep focusing on the buttons. So just like we did on the other side with that Fox D-pad, the buttons are clicky, they have a short travel. Overall, it's not a bad experience, it's just I wish this was more one-player focused, and my only real complaint here is that D-pad. They really should have done an actual D-pad versus using this button layout, because nobody really wants this. Even me with my Joy-Cons, I reshelled one just to have a D-pad, and I'm hoping that in the future we do have that option here too, where we can just order the controller, throw it in there, and it's going to be our regular D-pad, because right now some of these retro games that are best played with a D-pad feel a little bit out of place. But just talking from a pure build quality standpoint, this definitely feels like a premium device. There's very little to no actual give in the controllers unless you really try to wiggle it on the left side, but other than that, this feels solid. The build quality is great, no real complaints on that side, everything was working as it should, so no complaints as far as that goes. Just please give us a D-pad, and if you really want to make me happy, give us a D-pad on top of the stick. Next up, let's take a quick look at the OS, because this is running Android 10, but there is a custom launcher, so it's not going to be your typical Android experience. The main screen is going to have your apps all in a line, kind of like the Switch, but smaller. First up, we have the VR option, which we're not even going to touch right now because we can't really do that. We have the PadMax Store, which if you wanted to get some apps from there, you have that option too, but I just use Google Play. And then we have all of our apps, all of your recently used ones. Then if we go all the way to the end, we're going to take a look at all the apps that we actually have installed. On the right controller on the bottom left, we have this little button here that if we press it, gives us this control panel, which is where we can set up brightness. And as you can see, the screen brightness isn't as dynamic as I would like. It doesn't take away from how great everything looks on here. Now, other than that, we also have our volume control, our key mapping function, which we'll get into that a little bit later. And we also have an FPS launcher over here on the top, and we can see the temperature that the system's running at. Unfortunately, during recording, I wasn't able to get my camera to sync with the screen refresh rate, and you might be seeing some lines coming across the screen. That's not going to be there in person, that's just issues with the screen and my camera. I just couldn't get it to work right, and I really hope this doesn't take away from the device because this honestly is a really good screen. Moving on, over here on the left we have this little gear icon that when you tap it, it's going to take you to this settings menu, and there are a few settings that you have to turn on yourself over in laboratory function. Pretty easy to do, you just toggle it on the ones that you want to have access to. A really important one is going to be performance management, and once you turn that one on, you're going to have access to 3 different performance profiles. So the first one is going to be game mode. That's the one I used for pretty much all of my testing during this video, except for one game I believe. There's a high performance mode, which is basically going to overclock things and give you a little bit more extra juice, but it is going to hurt the battery, and energy saving mode. So if you're playing some lighter games that aren't too demanding and you want to extend your battery life as much as possible, that's the one you would pick. You also have the ability to set different resolutions on the screen, so it can go from 1080p 60 all the way up to 4K 120. Now, there are very few games that are going to be able to take advantage of this, and if you do that, just keep in mind that the battery is going to drain really fast. In fact, as soon as I turn it on, the fan just kicked on, so I'd just stay away from that one. They recommend that you use 90 1080p, but I just set it to 60 and that's where I left it. I also tried to set up Daijisho as my main launcher, but I wasn't able to do it. Whenever I would go in and try to change it from the regular launcher over Daijisho, it would just kick me out, so I wasn't able to do it. Every time I would open it, launch a game and then exit, or just press the home button, it would take me back to the main screen. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. Personally, I don't have a problem launching from the main Android interface, so not a big deal to me. But hopefully we do see things open up in a later update, because it would be really nice to set up things like Reset Collection or Daijisho as the main screen if we're going to be using this mostly for emulation. But to be fair, I never found the OS to be getting in the way or really stopping me from doing anything that I wanted to do. It's just, I want to set up a custom launcher, so let me do it. Now, before we get into the games, we have to do the mandatory gamepad test and just make sure that all the inputs are being read correctly. And luckily, everything is working as it should be. L2, R2 are functioning as analog triggers and all the buttons are being registered. Now, I completely forgot to cover this earlier, but there is gyro in here and it will work with your emulators and your native games that support it. Now, unfortunately, there is one problem, and that's the sticks. Now, this isn't going to be a huge deal because most games, it's just not going to matter, but they're being registered as circles instead of a square. What that means is that certain games that rely on the cursor making it all the way to the corner aren't going to register that movement, and your character is going to be walking instead of running. Now, for the majority of emulated games, this isn't going to be a big deal because it doesn't really matter for them. But if you are streaming or some games that do rely on that, you're going to notice that, where your character is going to move weird. But other than that, the sticks are working just fine. There's no drift, there's no snapping, none of that. It's just that one issue that I hope they do fix. Alright, so finally, let's get into some games. I'm going to start off with native Android games. Now, if you're curious about what kind of games you can find on Android, RetroTech has a great video showing gamepad supported games that you can get on the Play Store, on Amazon Store, or on Netflix. So there are a lot of options as well as a lot of community ports that, while not being official, are still going to work. Just for games like that, if you are going to be running some ports of indie games, at least pick it up somewhere. Just make sure those smaller devs at least get something out of it. Now, that being said, if there is an Android game that you want to play that has gamepad support, you're going to be able to play it on this. There's not much to really say about that here because the chip in here is more than capable of running pretty much whatever's available for Android at even some of the higher settings. So these Android handhelds aren't going to be just for emulation, but a huge library of games that are available. And for those games that you can't get native gamepad support for, there is the key mapping function, which we're going to show here in a second. But let's just wrap it up on this side of things. Out of all the games I've tested, there was only one game that I found that just wasn't recognizing my inputs, and that's not something I would put on the Pimax because that game doesn't recognize any inputs, and that's Evoland. So I just decided not to show it just to save time on that one, but hopefully if somebody knows a fix for that, please let me know because that game is driving me crazy. And I own it on Steam and I own it on the Switch and I can play it on those platforms, but now it's just a personal thing where I have to get that thing to work. I don't know what's doing it, but anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. Yes, you're going to be able to play pretty much any Android game that gets gamepad support, and the ones that don't, we have the key mapping function to help us out with, so let's go over to that and show you how that one works. So for games like Genshin Impact that don't have native gamepad support, all we do is bring out that little control panel, pick key mapper, and that's going to bring up this little menu here. So from here we can drag and drop what we want on the screen. So if we want to set the sticks, and let's make sure we center that correctly, we just drop it where we want it to, with the left one on the left side of controller and the right one for camera control. Now we also have to set our action buttons, so we're just going to drag and drop these over here and put them over the areas of the screen that you would normally be interacting with. And once you have that set, to set the buttons, you just tap on it and then press the button you want that to correspond to, and that's it. You're going to have everything mapped the way you want it to. You can also adjust the way the sticks interact with the screen simply by tapping on it. That's going to bring you to this menu, and here you can adjust the joystick size. So if there's a certain radius that you have to hit to get the proper amount of movement, you can adjust it here. You can also adjust things like sensitivity of the XY axis as well as the speed of movement. Even reverse it if you like to play with reverse controls. Unfortunately, the software isn't as easy to use as I wish it was, because when you first set it up for like camera controls, it doesn't move the way you intended it to move. Instead, you have to come back in and adjust the sensitivity or the speed to get things to move as they should. But once you do, it's a pretty good experience, and overall I'm happy it's here and that it is this fleshed out. I'm just hoping that it gets a little bit more user friendly and a little bit easier to set up. Up to now, I think the best screen mapping software I've used has been on the Ion Odin, so I'm hoping some of the features there make their way here. Maybe not necessarily as a copy, but at least take some inspiration from that one, because that was the easiest one to set up and get it working, and just having presets and downloads available for things that people already made is going to be pretty good. I can see the options there. There's just not there for download as of this point, but hopefully the more people get their hands on this, the more of those we start seeing. Now we're going to talk about the fun stuff, and that's emulation. So first off, let me just start by saying that I didn't really want to show all of the lower end systems in here, because there's really no point in me going back and showing you Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 1, any of those. They're all going to run no problems. There really isn't going to be a single game from those systems that you can throw at this that it's not going to be able to handle. Same thing goes for PSP. So you're going to be able to upscale most of your PSP games. Actually, I shouldn't say most. You're going to be able to upscale all of your PSP games at least to 1080p, and it's going to run without any issues. Now, my plan originally was to start with 3DS. Now, unfortunately, after I recorded all that and I uploaded this to my computer to start editing, I realized that the footage just wasn't very useful, and I've decided to cut that out. But let me just say that 3DS does perform very, very well on this system, and I will be doing a full-on emulation showcase in the near future. So if there are any games that you'd like me to show in that video, go ahead and leave them down in the comments. But now let's get into what's actually in this video. So the first system I covered was GameCube, and performance here was really good. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay on just mainline Dolphin for all my testing. I did have to go to MMJR, but basically every single game that I threw at this was able to play at least 720p at full speed in gaming mode. So I didn't even have to go into that higher performance setting to be able to get these games to run like that. And really, while you could push 1080p on this screen, on a 5.5 inch screen, 720p is going to look really, really good, and it's going to give you longer battery life. So I would really suggest you stay at 720p for all of these games, unless you absolutely have to, or you plug this into a TV and you just want to see the game at 1080p. But basically every game I threw at it, 720p, like I said, mainline Dolphin and Dolphin MMJR were the ones I used. I would say if you just want to save yourself time, just stick with MMJR. It usually performs better. It is going to be slightly less accurate, so if you do want to have the most accurate experience, go ahead and use mainline. But keep in mind that if you do want to upscale those games, you are going to have to go into the higher performance settings for that specific emulator, so battery life is going to suffer. Moving on to PlayStation 2, performance wasn't as good as with GameCube, as in I wasn't able to upscale games as much as I wanted them to, but I was still able to go a little bit above 1x, so 1.25 to 1.5, and of course there's going to be a lot of lighter games that are going to be able to be upscaled to 2 to 3 times native resolution, but for the harder ones like Ratchet & Clank, I was able to go at 1.25, which still makes it look pretty nice on a screen this size, and there really weren't any slowdowns or anything like that to really mention, outside of a couple here and there on something like Sly Cooper, which is a little bit harder to run. I did have some minor slowdowns there, but really nothing that would really kill the experience of playing these games. And with widescreen patches on this screen, even with that lower resolution, the games look really, really good. So being that I was able to run games like Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter and Shadow of the Colossus at full speed, I can say that this is going to be a very, very good PlayStation 2 machine. Now, unfortunately, the emulator for PlayStation 2 games is no longer in development, so we're not going to see more improvements, at least not in the immediate future, unless somebody else is able to pick up that mantle and continue to work on that. But for what is there, I don't really think there's going to be many games that you can't play on this handheld, so that's pretty amazing to see at this size. Now, again, some of those higher end games like Sly Cooper, I did have to bump up to that performance mode, so your battery isn't going to be the best on that, but still, the fact that a small handheld like this can run a game like that is pretty crazy. And again, I mentioned a few games that I'm not showing here, but I will be doing an emulation showcase later on, so if there are games that you want to see, make sure you drop a comment and I'll do my best to show them. Now, the final system I'm going to be covering is going to be Switch, and I know Switch emulation is a little bit weird for a lot of people, so I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but just note that there are going to be a lot of games that are going to be working. But the state of Switch emulation on Android is a little bit weird right now, because we do have Yuzu now, but it's only for Android 11 and up, and currently we're only running Android 10. So it's not going to be officially supported until Pimax either goes up to Android 11 or Yuzu does an Android 10 build. Now, there is an unofficial build of it that will be working on this. I haven't installed it yet. I just have Skyline Edge, which is no longer in development. We will have Strato sometime in the future, and we'll see how that goes. But as of right now, with what's available, you are going to get a lot of games to be able to play. Now, in the future, I'll most likely use Yuzu. I just wanted to set up Skyline because I'm familiar with it. I know how it runs on other systems, and I just wanted to see how big the jump was. And it's a pretty sizable amount. Like, there are games that I couldn't even get to boot on things like the Odin, which I'm able to play on this with no problem. Now, again, I do own these games on other systems. I want to see what things can do. So yeah, if it's possible, I'm going to put it on here. So we're going to wrap up the emulation section of this video there because it's already getting pretty long, and I know I tend to lose people if I make the video too long. So let's just move on to our final thoughts. So is the Pimax Portal worth it? Well, I would say in a bubble, yeah, definitely, it is worth it. It's a very capable Android-based handheld. It's pretty simple to use. Android, in my opinion, is the easiest thing to emulate on. Sure, the setup at first can be a little bit of a pain just because of how long it takes, but it's pretty easy to do. Now, in general, I would say it's tough because it really depends on the user that you are and whether you want Android or you want x86. If you want an x86 handheld, you just want something that's going to play as much as possible, then no, the PAM X Portal isn't going to be worth it for you. You're better off getting something like the Steam Deck, which is going to be able to do a lot more at not too much more money. Of course, you're going to add some storage to that and it is going to up the cost a little bit, but storage is pretty cheap nowadays. So really the price isn't that off. But if you just want to stay on Android, you want something that's going to be simple to use, you want something that's going to be smaller, that's going to have better battery life, then definitely, if you want the most capable Android handheld with a better aspect ratio, calling out the Razer here with that 21:9, then yeah, definitely go with the Portal. But I would say definitely go with the base model and just add an SD card. It's going to be much easier for you and you're going to save a lot of money. Sure, the QLED screen is gorgeous to look at, but you are looking at a price difference of about $200. So is it really worth $200 more for something that you're going to be using primarily as a handheld? Then no, I would say it's not. Now, it's also going to be available on Amazon, so if you don't want to wait and pick it up there, that is going to be an option. But keep in mind that it is going to be a little bit more expensive if you go that route. Now, just to wrap things up, there are things I don't like about the Portal, but there are things I do love about it. Things I don't like, I absolutely hate that there's no D-pad on this, so I'm just gonna hope that they fix that. And things that I do love about it, I love the screen quality. I'm sure the LCD screen looks just as good. I love how compact it is. It's pretty small considering how much it can actually do. I love how powerful it is, and to an extent, I love how modular it is. I feel like it opens the door for some other things. I'm also excited to see what they're going to be able to do with VR on it because I have a Quest 1 and I think it's time to update, so if I can get this to work as both, then that's awesome and that's definitely an added value. But that's still to be determined to see how well that's going to be incorporated. Overall, do I like the Portal? Yes. Do I recommend the Portal? Yeah, if you're the right buyer, yeah, definitely. But the most important thing here is, what do you think? Let me know in the comments if this is something you're interested in, if you feel like it's too expensive for you, if you feel like it's worth it. Just whatever you think about the Portal, go ahead and share it with us. I hope this video was informative. I hope it helped you. I hope it answered some questions about the Portal. And if you did like it, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share the video in case there's anybody you know that might be interested in it. It really helps the channel grow, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a great day.